In what could signal a shift in the United States policy, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris has called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, pointing to a humanitarian catastrophe unfolding as a result of the war between Hamas and Israel. Harris cited the immense scale of suffering in Gaza as making the case for an immediate ceasefire, at least for the next 6 weeks. Now, let's bring in a lecturer in the Department of International Relations at the University of Johannesburg, Ndzalama Mathebula. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. So this is possibly the strongest criticism yet, of Israel by the U.S. Yet just 2 weeks ago, the U.S. vetoed another National Security Council draft resolution on Israel. Just talk to us about what this means.
Good day, Unati. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the invite. So then what you are seeing is a turbulent response towards what you would call the Israeli and Palestine war. And the reason for that, I do believe that the war itself is now starting to be costly to the United States administration, the Joe Biden administration, in terms of votes, in terms of the taxes, in terms of the votes and how people actually, or the voters, seeing that USA is bound to have its elections soon, how the voters actually perceive the war, and it might actually make them change how they would then vote in the war. I mean, in the polls. So then it becomes really difficult because now their response has to be tailored according to what the voters would best see as the best solution to this war.
So in actual fact, what you are telling us is that these strong words and that we've heard from the Vice President may not necessarily be sincere, given, as you rightfully point out, it is an important election year for the U.S. Come November 2024.
That is true. That is true. The reason why I'm stating this out is because there's no reason for them to change their stance soon, provided that it does not harm their national interests or it does not harm any of their agendas seeing through 2024. Therefore, it might not necessarily be sincere because we know how USA can be coercive at times, how they can use hard power and how they can use their interest, their influence and power to actually see through their interests. But in this case, it seems that actually being against the ceasefire is now being more costly because it becomes unreasonable, and it really paints them as this instigator of war instead of the agenda or the position that they forever claim to take of being humanitarian and solving wars around the world. So then it becomes costly because now there's a disjuncture between the agenda that they take and the kind of key player that they claim to be in the international relations space.
How then does Israel respond, particularly, in light of these underwritten currents that you speak of in terms of what the US's game plan really is? I mean, the Vice President even went on to say that Israel must open new border crossings, and commit and not commit, or at least commit, to opening up these areas so that they don't impose these unnecessary restrictions. As yet, I don't know if you've seen any response from Israel.
It's most likely that there won't be any response from Israel. We've seen many of the times that Israel doesn't actually take responsibility, or they do not heed any responses or any advice given by the world. And this is because it's because of the position or the alliances that Israel has in terms of international relations. But at the same time, I would like to point out that, with Israel and with everything that's happening, it's really sad, the fact that there are so many weapons being transported to Israel, and instead of weapons being transported to Gaza, we have aid and restrictions, aid and health and food. It's an unfair play that's taking place because it's now some form of a zero-sum game because they are on different paths to actually partake in a war together. So then whatever we do the alliances that are actually behind Israel, they still deem the country more fit to go to war as compared to Gaza, which many of the countries, or the USA itself, is advocating that they should get aid and food as they are being killed. The baseline of this war is that there's genocide being committed, people are losing their lives, and the least that people could need is food and aid at most, but rather they would need for them to be some embargo on the weapons that are being provided to Israel in order for the war to stop.
So, of course, that kindly puts a damper on the talks that are currently happening in Cairo, where a ceasefire is being proposed of at least 6 weeks for that aid. What are we likely to see there, considering that Israel is not even amongst those that are in attendance?
Israel doesn't seem to have any interest in stopping, in going to a ceasefire. Rather, they have this realist, selfish approach towards actually resoluting this war. And why do I say this? It's because they've never heeded any criticism that was given to them since the war started last year. On the 7th of October. So then that actually shows you that they are so focused on what they are aiming to achieve. But unfortunately, their achievement this time, or their national interests, are at the cost of a genocide of another country, of wiping out another country. So then we are less likely to see any response. And another thing, they have little to no evidence as to why the war has to continue, because each and every time they are asked to give a reason for their stance or for their actions, they always point to Hamas. But then we hear that lots of people that are being killed who are unarmed, who are not part of Hamas. So then they have no clear justification. And due to that, they have no basis, no foundation or justification for this war. Therefore, it's hard for them to actually engage in these talks, because then they lose even before going to these talks, because they do not have evidence, they do not have facts to back up their position and their action. But rather, what you are seeing is a country that's acting very violent, that's very hostile, and causing atrocities, that believes it's a bully, and it's very coercive, and it is pushing its its agenda through hard power to actually wipe out another country.
Israel would then, disagree in terms of having no real reasons to continue with the war. Of course, one of the things that they've asked Hamas to do, or ordered Hamas to do before these talks even took place, was that they give them proof of which of the Israeli, captives they have are still alive. And of course, they are saying that the only time they will even enter into any negotiation of a ceasefire is if that information is released.
But unfortunately, this goes on both sides. The reason why, as much as they want to see a list of hostages, Israeli hostages in Gaza, that's the same thing that Hamas is looking for. They want to see the prisoners released, the Gaza prisoners that are in Israel being released. So then it's very hard for two parties to have a negotiation if one party does not necessarily bend to the preferences or the negotiations of another party. So mediation itself and coming together to negotiate, we both have to be in a state of vulnerability. We both need to be in a state of understanding that we are letting go of something on both parties. But now, unfortunately, with Israel, it seems that it wants to have its end of the bargain done first in order for them to negotiate. But unfortunately, that's not how negotiations go. That's not how they're conducted in principle. So then it becomes hard, because there's no guarantee that they will actually bend to the ceasefire once the list is released.